Happy Friday, ambitious readers. We've got a super classic edition of Reading Ambitiously for you this week. We're no longer in the Denver International Airport. We're back at home, and we've got a big idea in store. So let's go ahead and jump right into this week's big idea, which is about the AI product strategy for model consumers. Now, most of our readers are not training AI models, although some of you are, and you know who you are. Glad to have you on board. Many of our readers are actually consuming AI models. And maybe that sounds obvious, but it does change where you place your bets. Because if you're not building the brain, your job is to build the system around the brain. That's the part the customers pay for. That's the part that compounds into durable value. That's the part that stays defensible when the underlying LLM continues to make meaningful improvement. Now, one really clean way to make sense of this AI world, in my opinion, is to split it into two camps. The first is model producers, and the second is model consumers. Now, model producers train frontier models, but increasingly so, they are shipping products on top of them. And in the American closed source world, that center of gravity really sits with three companies: OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google. And maybe you could make a case that XAI belongs in the conversation too. But the rest of us are model consumers, mostly software and services companies who are renting the intelligence and building the product around it. And if the brain is rented, you've got to think about what the most defensible way is to build that product. So let's talk about that. And let's talk about the brain first. And you know all of their names: OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, and you certainly know their apps: ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. These AI labs, as they are often referred to, are no longer just building LLMs. They're building across three layers: models, apps, and harnesses. Let's talk about all three, because I think you're going to hear these terms used quite a bit in 2026. We know what the models are. Those are the brains. They determine reasoning, this sort of model's ability to write code, and multimodal perception. They're what all these benchmarks measure, like the SWE benchmark, the software engineering benchmark, or the last great exam. They are where the labs are in a very close race. Apps, those are the front door. They're the products that you use to talk to the models, and how models increasingly complete work for you. And more, they're sitting inside of productivity suites, inside of developer environments and operating systems. And finally, harnesses. Now, these are what actually turn intelligence into work. A harness is what a system has to use AI tools, to take actions, to complete a multi-step set of tasks. Apps come with harnesses. They give the models tools and permissions, access to files, logging, memory, guardrails, and the ability to execute a multi-step set of tasks. A harness is the difference between answering a question in a chatbot and actually completing the job. And maybe this term harness feels old-fashioned. I think it does make a lot of sense when you think about its context in terms of riding a horse. But maybe we could also think of it as an exoskeleton. You're not just adding intelligence, you're channeling that intelligence, that raw cognitive power of an LLM, and you're giving it structure. You're directing that power towards output that you can rely on. And the same model inside of two different harnesses can behave like two very different products. Think about Claude in a chat window. That's one experience, and it's powered by either Sonnet 4.6 or Opus 4.6. And Claude inside of a coding harness is a totally different experience, because the coding harness is designed to read a repo, edit files, run commands. Claude Cowork is one designed for the desktop, which has access to your local file system and has autonomy to complete tasks inside of your computer. I think all of this matters because the model producers are not stopping at building models. They cannot stop at building models because they are quickly becoming commoditized. And so they're going to build apps and harnesses. And they're going to use distribution and retention, and they're going to go after the arenas where margins live. And to quote Jeff Bezos, your margin is my opportunity. Well, is anyone surprised then why the AI labs are encroaching on what used to exclusively be the domain of very high margin software companies? If a model producers are going to climb into the app and the harness layers, then model consumers need to know what they can own. They have to be really thoughtful about where their intellectual property is going to be. And so if you are a software company, you are a model consumer. You are renting the brain. You are building around it. This is typically referred to as wrapping an LLM. And here's a simple stress test. If your API keys for OpenAI or Anthropic disappear, what's your IP? I think that's a really important question you should be thinking about if you are a model consumer. And I think right now we're seeing 5 areas that consumers are building intellectual property. So let's talk briefly about these 5. The first is integrations, super unglamorous work, connectors, mapping to schemas, setting up the right permissions, and normalizing the data. If you're an enterprise software, integration and connectors are the product. And if your AI cannot reliably access the right data with the right permissions, you've just got a demo and you've got not something you can deploy into production. The second is proprietary data sets and modeling those data sets for the domain. LLMs are trained on public data. And so you got to think about, what data do you own? Which data is not public? And then how do you make that data legible to the model? I think a lot about what Palantir is doing here with their ontology, a data model that helps actually represent the data for the domains with which they're using AI in. The third is tools and plugins. And these are features that give the model the ability to just do more and have a more predictable result when they're doing it. And a lot of companies are building tools and plugins that are specific to their domains. And then when users are actually asking the models questions, the models do a tool call and use those tools to generate the best possible output. Very related to that is the fourth area, which is skills. These are reusable workflows, instructions, sort of playbooks, run books that tell the AI what to do. Enterprises don't just have 1 or 2 workflows, they have hundreds. And a lot of companies, I think, are going to start developing libraries of skills that compound this knowledge of how the AI is driving these and automating these workflows. And the fifth area is in memory. As your system gains an understanding of how your users drive it, you can capture the memory and give it to the AI every time they use it. And I think more and more we're going to see model consumers lock that memory in. In fact, there was a big article this week about how Anthropic has released some prompts that make it easy for you to siphon off your memories from ChatGPT to use them in Anthropic. I think memory will be less and less portable, thus the fifth and most important set of intellectual property. There are others, maybe a sixth important one we'll talk about here in a second. But the idea is this: if you're a model consumer and what you're building should ladder up to at least one or more of these areas that you can accrue defensible IP. And once you've done that and thought through that, then I think the product strategy can get clearer. And right now, what we're seeing is that there are really 4 common product strategies that model consumers are currently using. And you need a playbook that maps to one of these 4. So let's talk about each of them. The first is building these universal AI assistants. These are the front doors into the application. They're the products that want to sit where the users spend a lot of time. The canonical example of this is Microsoft Copilot. And where is it? It is inside of the productivity suite that is Microsoft Office 365, and it is available where a lot of knowledge workers do their jobs in Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. There are other companies like Glean that are also examples of this. And what have these 2 apps done? They've built connectors, they've built integrations, they've built ways to permission and entitle and live inside of the IT environments of their enterprise buyers. They have done an incredible job wrapping the LLM with a lot of the IP that I talked about in the previous section. The second major area that model consumers are building out products are AI agents. Now, AI agents are digital coworkers that have skills similar to their human labor equivalents. And AI agents are focused on generating outcomes for your customers. And ultimately, what they're doing is converting what has previously been service into software. And there's a lot of tooling and entitlement, and audit trail and skills that go into the AI agent's ability to generate these outcomes. And it's a real opportunity to take on what has traditionally been business process outsourcing or managed services in particular domains. The third product strategy is what I would loosely just refer to as enterprise grade controls or responsible AI. And for those of us in enterprise software, these are tried and true capabilities that our customers have always needed. And it's the infrastructure that gives them the ability to have trust and transparency with how you're using this technology, whether it's permissions, governance, compliance, observability, logging, auditing. I mean, these are all feature sets that are unique and important to your customers, to their domains, perhaps to their regulators, and you can build product strategy around them. And finally, the fourth is what we'll call embedded AI. And this is adding capabilities and features to your existing systems that are now possible because of AI. Think of a set of quick prompts that summarize, or a set of quick prompts that allow you to triage or autofill a form. These are features that are added to where the work is happening, and they're now generative and AI like in nature, and they're being embedded directly into the model consumer's product. So I think when you've got these five ways that you are creating intellectual property and these four product strategies, what model consumers need to do right now is really think about the recipe and the chemistry of how these things all work together. And the reason they need to do that is because the frontier models are only going to get better. And right now they're converging. In fact, it's been harder to tell them apart in 2026. You know what we can tell apart? Their products. The labs know this. That's why they're going to keep investing in their apps and their harnesses. And they're going to likely continue to encroach on high margin territories that have used to exclusively belong to software companies. At the same time, you don't need to be building one of these brains to be wildly successful in this era. You can build around one, but you do need to be explicit on where your differentiation lives, where your intellectual property sits, whether it's integrations, proprietary data sets, the ontology that explains those data sets, the tools, the plugins, the skills, the memory, maybe even that sixth piece of intellectual property, which is in the near term training a small language model yourself. Because here's the uncomfortable truth for consumers. These models are only going to get better, to the point where some products in the market today are going to wake up one day and discover that what they thought was a moat was simply just a proximity to a frontier model. And when it got better and the underlying intelligence meaningfully improved, their value proposition either compressed or completely went away overnight. And it reminds me of a quote that I'm told Larry Ellison once said, which is to the effect of, "Your company is a feature on my platform. Your company is a feature on my platform." And he was right, because a lot of companies of that era were ultimately just features on Oracle. And in an AI world, that is the risk. It is the risk that what you build can be absorbed very quickly into one of these AI labs, apps, or harnesses. You were never building a platform, but you were building a feature and borrowing the intelligence that powered it. At the same time, you can unlock all of that intelligence for your customers and be wildly successful as a model consumer. So as long as you keep in mind the recipe that's going to lead to your long-term durable and defensible success. You got to make sure that you own something that survives when the brains get smarter and smarter every single week. That's this week's big idea. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Great start to your weekend. We'll be with you again soon. Please do take care of each other. Bye-bye.